No one in the village could explain why the child never crossed a doorway after sunset. Every night, when the sky turned dark and cooking fires flickered out one by one, families shut their doors and pulled their children inside. Laughter faded. Footsteps disappeared. Silence took over the village. And still, the child remained outside. Always standing at the edge of the path. Always barefoot. Always watching. Some nights, people swore the child did not blink at all. Others claimed they heard soft breathing long after every home had gone dark. A few said the child whispered to someone no one else could see. But no matter the rain, the cold, or the hunger, the child never entered a house at night. Not once. Mothers warned their children not to look through the cracks in the door. Elders lowered their voices when the sun began to fall. Dogs refused to bark when the child passed. There were nights when shadows moved where they should not. Nights when something heavy seemed to circle the village, testing doors, pressing against walls. And always, in the same place, stood the silent child. Watching. Waiting. As if stepping inside, even for a moment, would unleash something far worse than the darkness itself. By day, the village felt ordinary in the way only lived-in places do. The sun rose slowly over the red earth, warming the mud walls of the homes and pulling life out of the ground. Smoke drifted lazily from cooking fires as women stirred pots of porridge and children chased one another between huts, laughing without reason. Roosters crowed too early, goats wandered where they were not meant to, and someone was always calling out another name. Life followed familiar rhythms. Water was drawn from the well. Grain was pounded with steady, echoing thuds. Elders sat beneath the wide acacia tree, arguing gently about things they had argued about for decades. Nothing about the village felt cursed, haunted, or afraid in the daylight. The child was there too. By morning, the silent child blended easily into the flow of daily life. They helped carry water without being asked. They swept the dirt yards of neighbors who were too old to bend. When younger children fell, scraped, or cried, the child was the first to kneel beside them, tying leaves around wounds the way the elders had taught. They smiled sometimes. Softly. Briefly. People noticed that the child listened more than they spoke. When spoken to, they answered politely but simply, never offering more than was asked. No complaints. No demands. Just a quiet presence that made work feel lighter. At midday, the heat pressed down hard, and everyone slowed. Men repaired nets or tools in the shade. Women shared food, passing bowls from hand to hand. Children lay half asleep on woven mats, dust clinging to their skin. The child always ate last. Not because anyone told them to, but because they waited. They made sure everyone else had taken their share first. If food ran short, the child would claim they were not hungry and slip away with nothing. No one questioned it. In the village, kindness often passed without comment. As afternoon faded, the air cooled and shadows stretched longer across the ground. This was the hour when families returned to their homes, when cooking fires were lit again and voices gathered closer together. The village smelled of smoke, maize, and something comforting that had no name. It was also the hour when people began to notice the child changing. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Just small things. The child stopped lingering. Their movements grew quicker, more focused. They finished tasks early, returned borrowed tools, and stepped back from doorways they had stood in all day. When invited to sit, to eat, to stay, the child would pause, only for a breath, then shake their head. As the sun dipped lower, the child drifted toward the outer paths of the village, toward open space. No one followed. This had become part of the rhythm too. Doors began to close. Fires burned lower. Children were called inside, their names spoken with a firmness that left no room for delay. Latches slid into place. Voices dropped. From inside the homes, the village felt safe. From outside, the world grew very wide and very dark. And somewhere between those two spaces, between warmth and shadow, between belonging and distance, the silent child waited for night to come. No one remembered exactly when the child had first appeared in the village. There was no story of arrival, no tale of a mother carrying them in, no elder who could say, "Yes, I was there when the child came." It was as if the village had simply woken up one morning and the child had always been part of it. Some believed the child had been born there. Others whispered that the child had walked out of the bush one day and never left. When asked, the child only smiled faintly and said nothing at all. By daylight, the child was easy to accept. They moved gently through the village, careful not to disturb, careful not to take up too much space. Their clothes were always clean, though worn thin from use. Their feet were tough from walking barefoot, yet they stepped as if the ground itself might feel pain. The elders noticed how the child greeted everyone the same way, young or old, strong or weak, with a slight bow of the head and eyes lowered in respect. When spoken to harshly, the child did not argue. When praised, they did not linger on it. There was something different about the way the child listened. When others spoke, the child did not just hear words. They watched faces. They studied pauses. It was as if they were carrying more than one conversation at a time, one spoken and another that lived beneath it. At night, that difference became impossible to ignore. Children began asking questions first. Why doesn't the child sleep inside? Is the child afraid of the dark? Does the child have a home? Parents answered with half-truths and distractions. The child prefers the air. Some people are just like that. Ask something else. But the questions did not stop. Women noticed that the child never accepted a blanket after sunset. Men noticed the child flinched when someone tried to guide them toward a doorway at dusk. Once, an elder placed a hand gently on the child's shoulder and suggested they rest inside for the night. The child's body went still. Not in fear, but in refusal. Their eyes lifted for just a moment, meeting the elder's gaze. There was no anger there. No defiance. Only a quiet certainty, heavy and unmovable. The elder withdrew his hand. From that night on, no one tried again. Rumors began to take shape in the spaces where certainty should have been. Some said the child carried a curse that could pass through walls. Others believed the child was guarding a secret too dangerous to bring indoors. A few whispered that the child was not fully a child at all. The child never responded to any of it. They did not defend themselves. They did not deny the stories. They continued to help, to smile softly, to vanish at dusk. But there were moments, small, unguarded moments, when the child's strangeness showed. Once, during a storytelling circle, a tale about spirits walking at night made the child's hands tremble. Another time, when a baby cried after sunset, the child turned sharply toward the sound, as if listening for something deeper than noise. And always, the child positioned themselves near the edges of the village when night fell, close enough to see every home, far enough to belong to none. People began to sense it then. The child was not avoiding the houses. The child was protecting them from something only they seemed to understand. It started with small things, so small that no one could say for certain when they began. A pot left outside overnight remained untouched, even though hyenas had been seen near the village the evening before. Footprints appeared in the dust at dawn, circling the outer huts, yet never crossing the threshold of a single home. Dogs whimpered in their sleep but did not bark, as if whatever passed through the darkness was not meant to be challenged. People noticed, then dismissed it. The village had always carried its share of strange nights. The world beyond the firelight was old, full of things that did not announce themselves. Still, something about these nights felt different, heavier, closer. And always, the child was there. Each evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, the child took their place along the outer path. They did not pace. They did not sit. They stood, facing outward, toward the bush, toward the unseen. Their posture was calm, but their attention was sharp, like a rope pulled tight. Once, a woman returning late from the well called out to the child, asking why they stood so still every night. The child answered without turning, "So the night does not wander." The words settled strangely in the air. When pressed to explain, the child fell silent again, as if the sentence had been more than they were allowed to give. Questions spread faster after that. Why did the child sometimes hum under their breath when the moon rose? Why did they trace patterns in the dirt with their toes, circles that were always erased by morning? Why did shadows seem to stop where the child stood, refusing to stretch any farther into the village? Some villagers began watching from behind their doors. They saw the child lift their head suddenly, listening to something far beyond human hearing. They saw the child whisper, not prayers, not words anyone recognized, but sounds shaped by breath and intention. Once, someone swore the air itself grew warmer around the child, as if the cold of night hesitated to come closer. Still, nothing truly bad happened. That was the most unsettling part. A child went missing from a neighboring village one night, but not from theirs. A storm tore through nearby homes, but their roofs held. Sickness passed through the region, yet the village remained untouched longer than anyone expected. People began to wonder if the child was the reason. Others wondered if the village was only being spared for now. Fear split quietly down the middle. Some left food outside for the child at night, placing bowls just beyond their doors, careful not to step outside themselves. Others avoided the child altogether, crossing to the other side of the path as dusk approached. One man spoke aloud what many were thinking. "What happens," he asked the elders, "if the child fails? Or leaves? Or decides to step inside?" No one answered. The child, however, seemed to hear everything. Their eyes grew darker as the nights passed. They slept less during the day, choosing instead to sit alone beneath trees, tracing the earth with their fingers. When asked if they were tired, the child nodded, but said they would manage. As if exhaustion was not a choice. As if it were part of the cost. One night, just after the moon reached its highest point, a sound rolled out of the darkness beyond the fields. Low, deep, wrong. It did not belong to any animal the villagers knew. Doors rattled softly. Children stirred in their sleep. The child did not move. They only straightened, feet pressing harder into the dirt, eyes fixed on the blackness ahead. And for the first time, the village felt certain of one thing. Whatever the child was holding back was growing closer. After the night of the sound, the village no longer slept the same. Morning still came, bringing light and routine, but something had shifted beneath it all. People spoke more quietly. Laughter ended sooner. Eyes followed the child longer than before, measuring, questioning. The sound itself was never heard again, at least not clearly. Yet traces of it lingered, like a memory the body refused to release. Some villagers woke with their hearts racing, certain something had stood just beyond their walls. Others dreamed of footsteps circling their homes, stopping at doors, waiting. And every time, when dawn arrived, the child was still there. Standing. Watching. Unbroken. The child's presence, once comforting in its quiet way, began to feel heavy. What had been kindness now felt like a debt no one knew how to repay. Food left outside sometimes went untouched, not because the child did not need it, but because they seemed too focused to eat. Their face grew thinner. Shadows deepened beneath their eyes. A few villagers started whispering openly. "If the child is protecting us," one woman said, "what are we being protected from?" "And why must it be the child?" another asked. "Why not all of us?" Fear has a way of searching for something to hold. Some began to believe the child was the cause, not the shield. They pointed to the strange nights, the circling footprints, the sounds. "Things follow the child," they said. "Things are drawn to them." The child heard these words too. They did not protest. They did not defend themselves. If anything, they grew quieter, withdrawing further from the center of the village even during the day. They chose paths that kept them near the edges, as if already accepting exile. One evening, an elder approached the child just before sunset. "You are welcome inside tonight," he said gently. "Whatever troubles you, we will face it together." For a moment, it seemed the child might agree. Their hands trembled. Their mouth opened, then closed again. Slowly, they shook their head. "If I enter," the child said softly, "you will not be safe." The elder frowned. "From what?" The child looked past him, toward the darkening bush. "From me," they replied. That night, the fear sharpened. A goat broke free of its rope and bolted into the darkness, screaming. Something unseen chased it. The sound ended too suddenly. No tracks were found the next morning, only disturbed earth at the edge of the fields. The child stood there until dawn, unmoving. By morning, the village was divided. Some argued the child must be forced inside, so whatever followed them could be trapped or revealed. Others insisted the child should be driven away entirely, before the darkness grew bold enough to cross into their lives. A decision was made without the child's presence. That evening, as the sun fell, several men gathered near the path where the child usually stood. They spoke calmly, but their bodies were tense, hands tight around lanterns and sticks. "We cannot live like this," one of them said. "Tonight, the child comes inside. We will see the truth." The child arrived as always, just as the last light vanished. They stopped when they saw the group. For the first time, fear crossed the child's face, not fear for themselves, but for the village behind the men. "Please," the child said quietly, "do not make me cross that door." The men stepped closer, and from the darkness beyond the fields, something answered. The sound came again, closer than before. It slid out of the darkness like breath through broken teeth, low, dragging, heavy with hunger. The men froze. Lantern flames wavered, bending away from the sound as if the air itself recoiled. The child turned slowly toward the fields. Whatever was out there, the child had been expecting it. "Go inside," the child said urgently, not raising their voice. "All of you. Lock the doors." No one moved. Fear had hardened into stubbornness. One man stepped forward and grabbed the child's arm. The child did not resist, but their skin was cold, unnaturally cold, as if the night had already claimed them. "You will not stand out there any more," the man said. "If something is following you, we will face it together." The child's eyes filled, not with tears, but with something heavier. "You do not understand," they whispered. "If I cross the threshold, it will follow." Another sound rolled from the dark. Closer still. The earth vibrated beneath their feet, just slightly, like a warning. The elders shouted from their doorways for everyone to come inside, but the men hesitated. Pride, fear, and doubt tangled together, making movement impossible. The child pulled free. For the first time, their calm broke. They stepped backward, away from the houses, away from safety, placing themselves between the village and the unseen presence beyond the fields. "Stay back," the child said, voice shaking. "This is my burden." A shadow shifted at the edge of the moonlight. Not a shape, not yet. More like a darkness that swallowed other darkness, bending the night around it. The dogs began to howl, then fell silent all at once. One of the men raised his lantern higher. The child reached out and pushed it down. "Do not show it the door," the child pleaded. "It is not allowed to see one." Too late. The shadow surged forward, stopping just beyond the child's feet. The air thickened. Breathing became difficult, as if the night itself pressed against their chests. The thing did not attack. It waited. The child stood trembling, arms spread slightly, as if holding back something far larger than themselves. Their breathing grew shallow. Sweat soaked their clothes despite the cold. "How long have you been doing this?" one elder called from inside a hut, his voice breaking. The child did not look back. "Since the first night I slept alone," they said. The shadow leaned closer. The child cried out softly, not in pain, but in effort. The ground beneath them cracked, fine lines spreading like veins in the dirt. Symbols, those same circles the child traced each night, glowed faintly, then faded. The shadow recoiled, hissing. It was not defeated, only delayed. The child staggered, nearly falling. The men rushed forward instinctively, but the child raised a hand, stopping them. "If I fall," the child said, barely standing, "it will step past me." Understanding began to dawn, slow and terrible. The child was not being followed. They were being used as a boundary. The elders shouted for the men to retreat inside. Doors slammed. Latches fell into place. The child remained outside alone, swaying but unbroken. As the night deepened, the shadow withdrew, dissolving back into the fields with a final angry sound that scraped across the bones. Silence returned. At dawn, the men found the child collapsed at the edge of the path, breathing, alive, but utterly drained. And for the first time, the village understood. The child's rule was never about fear of the dark. It was about keeping the dark from learning how to enter. The village did not celebrate the morning. People stepped out of their homes slowly, as if the night might still be watching. The air felt thinner, scraped raw by what had passed through it. Even the birds were quiet, perching without song. The child lay where they had fallen, just beyond the last doorway. Alive, but changed. Their breathing was shallow, each rise of the chest uncertain. Dark marks traced their arms and neck, like shadows that had soaked into skin instead of fading with the night. When an elder knelt beside them, he felt heat and cold at once, as if the child existed between two worlds that no longer agreed. The elders carried the child to the shade of the acacia tree, but they did not carry them inside. No one argued. Women brought water. Someone placed a folded cloth beneath the child's head. A healer pressed herbs to their lips, whispering words meant for spirits as much as for flesh. The child stirred. Their eyes opened briefly, unfocused, searching the sky as if checking whether the night had truly gone. When they recognized faces instead of darkness, their body relaxed, just a little. "You should not have stayed," one elder said softly, tears streaking lines through the dust on his face. "You should have let us help." The child swallowed, voice weak but steady. "If I let go," they said, "it learns." "What learns?" a woman asked. The child hesitated. For the first time in their life, silence felt heavier than speech. "It is not one thing," the child finally said. "It is what remains when doors are opened to grief and never closed again." The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. The child's gaze drifted toward the homes, toward the closed doors that had protected them for so long. "When I was younger," the child continued, "I crossed a threshold I should not have crossed. I followed something that promised comfort. When I returned, it followed me." A tremor ran through the listeners. The healer whispered, "A night-bound spirit." The child nodded faintly. "It cannot enter where it has never been invited," the child said. "But it waits. It watches. It learns patterns." One elder's voice broke. "So you stayed outside, all this time, so it would follow me instead," the child said. "So it would never see your doors open to the dark." The weight of it settled over the village like ash. They remembered now, the way the child always positioned themselves between the fields and the homes. The way shadows bent away. The way disasters passed them by. The child had been offering themselves as the first door. "And if you step inside?" someone asked, already knowing the answer. The child closed their eyes. "Then it knows," they said. "And once it knows, it never forgets." A child from the village stepped forward, clutching their mother's hand. "Will it come back?" the child asked. The silent child smiled, just barely. "It always does," they said. "That is why I must stand again tonight." A murmur of protest rose instantly. The elders shook their heads. The healer reached out, pleading, "You will not survive another night like this." The silent child pushed themselves up on trembling arms, determination burning beneath exhaustion. "It is not about surviving," they said. "It is about holding the line long enough." Long enough for what? No one dared to ask. As the sun began its slow descent once more, the village realized with horror and clarity, the child had never been guarding the village alone. They had been buying time, for something that was still coming. The elders gathered as the sun leaned low, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the ground. No one spoke at first. The truth, once revealed, had changed the weight of every sound, every breath. The child sat against the acacia tree, wrapped in cloths, eyes half closed. They looked smaller now, not because they were weak, but because the village could finally see the cost they had been carrying. One elder broke the silence. "You said you crossed a threshold once," he said carefully. "Tell us what truly happened." The child did not answer right away. When they did, their voice was calm, almost distant, as if speaking from memory rather than pain. "My mother died at night," the child said. The words landed heavily. "She was ill, and the healer was far away. When her breathing stopped, I was alone with her body. I was afraid. I called out. I begged for anything to answer." The wind moved through the leaves above them. "In my fear, I opened the door and called into the darkness," the child continued. "I did not know that some things are always listening." The villagers felt the cold of that moment as if it were happening again. "It came as a comfort," the child said. "It wore the shape of kindness. It told me I would never be alone again. All it wanted was permission to follow me wherever I went. The child's hands clenched in the cloth. I realized too late what I had done. When morning came, it could not cross back inside. But it stayed near, watching, waiting for me to invite it again. A woman covered her mouth, tears slipping through her fingers. That is when I learned, the child said softly, that a home is not just walls. It is an agreement, a promise. And once broken, it cannot be mended the same way. The elders understood now. The child had become the only place the spirit was allowed to stand. It cannot cross a doorway unless I do first, the child explained. As long as I remain outside at night, it remains outside with me. And if you die? One elder asked, voice barely audible. The child looked up, meeting his eyes. Then it will be free to search for another voice willing to call it, they said. That is why I must not die inside the village. Silence followed, thick, suffocating. All the years the village had slept peacefully. All the times the child had stood hungry, cold, and alone. All the misunderstandings, the whispers, the fear. It had never been punishment. It had been protection. You should have told us, someone said, choking on the words. The child shook their head. If you had known, they replied, you would have tried to save me. And in doing so, you would have saved the spirit too. Understanding struck deep and sharp. The child's silence had been necessary. As the sun slipped lower, the child struggled to their feet once more. The village moved instinctively to stop them, but hesitated, finally understanding why they never could. I cannot hold it much longer, the child said honestly. But I have taught it one thing. The elders leaned in. I have taught it that I am the door, the child said. And doors can choose when to close. For the first time, fear shifted, not toward the child, but toward the night itself. And for the first time, the village prepared not to hide behind doors, but to stand in understanding of the sacrifice that had been made for them all. That night, the village did something it had never done before. They did not pull the child away from the edge of the path. They did not argue, plead, or pretend there was another way. Instead, as the sun finally disappeared, the doors of the homes remained closed, but not in fear. They closed in respect. Inside, families sat quietly. No laughter. No stories. No cooking fires. Parents held their children and explained, in voices barely above breath, that silence was sometimes the greatest form of protection. Outside, the child stood alone once more. But this time, they were not unseen. From behind every door, from behind every wall, the village was present. Listening. Witnessing. The night deepened. The darkness beyond the fields stirred, restless, drawn as it always was to the one voice that had once invited it in. The shadow returned, heavier than before, pressing against the boundary the child had become. The child did not raise their arms. They did not whisper warnings. They simply stood. And in that stillness, something changed. The shadow reached forward and stopped. For the first time, it did not advance. It hesitated. The child's breathing slowed. Their body relaxed, just slightly. The strain that had twisted their face for so many years softened, as if a long-held weight had finally been set down. You are not welcome, the child said, not aloud, but with certainty. The shadow recoiled, shrinking, losing shape. It had fed on fear, on loneliness, on unanswered grief. But now the grief had been seen. The loneliness had been shared. The child was no longer alone. The shadow withdrew, not in anger, but in defeat. It dissolved into the night, leaving behind nothing but cool air and quiet earth. When dawn came, the child was still standing. But something was different. They stepped forward, toward the village. Slowly, carefully. This time, nothing followed. The child crossed the threshold of the nearest home. The world did not end. The sun rose fully, spilling light across the village. Doors opened. People stepped out, eyes wide, hearts full. The child stood among them, no longer apart. No longer the boundary. The elders understood then, the spirit had not been defeated by force, but by love witnessed and shared. What had bound it had been silence and isolation. What released it was truth and belonging. The child stayed in the village after that. They slept indoors. They laughed more. They spoke when needed and remained quiet when words would only weaken meaning. And the village remembered. They taught their children never to call into the darkness alone. They taught them that grief must be spoken, not hidden. That doors matter, not just wooden ones, but the ones we open inside ourselves. They told the story for generations. Of the silent child who never entered a home at night. Of the fear they misunderstood. Of the sacrifice they almost destroyed. And of the night they learned that silence, when chosen in love, can become a blessing strong enough to hold back the dark.